It's fair to me.
Yes, he did.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Hey, thanks for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you with us. Another one of those weeks when there are too many things to talk about in too little time. So let's get straight to the introductions, starting with the news director for the Big 550 KTRS, Wendy Wiese. Hey, Wendy. Along with Mr. Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He's Ray Hartmann from the Riverfront Times, which he founded in 1977, and St. Louis in the Know on the Big 550 KTRS weeknights at 9. And Mr. Alvin Reid from the St. Louis American, the Big 590, and the Dave Glover Show, 97.1 FM News Talk. A little later this hour, we're going to talk to Derrick Goold, the beat writer for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and we'll talk about the baseball season resuming. So I know folks will be interested in that. He's one of the great writers of our country who happens to be in our backyard. Well, Alvin, we're going to kick things off with you because area leaders are patting themselves on the back, and they're very happy, maybe rightfully so, that Accenture Federal Services has promised 1,400 jobs for town and country. It does come with a cost. They're going to get some state tax breaks as well as some property and sales tax breaks amounting to about $30 million or $21,000 per job. But overall, it's been a while since we've heard any firm coming to St. Louis and promising 1,400 jobs, right?
Well, yes, but they promised 200 jobs and the rest to come along later. We don't know what's going to come along later. You know, a year ago, we didn't know a pandemic was going to come along later. We didn't know an economic downturn was going to come along later. These are promises that they'll get the tax breaks, but it seems to me that cart is definitely before horse in that we don't ever know that these jobs will ever be here. I guess Accenture will be in existence 5 years from now, but do we know that? No. So no, I don't know. This seemed like more photo op for the governor and for the congresswoman than it was actually great news for the region.
Well, I'll tell you what, Alvin, ladies and gentlemen, may not be far off the mark. This has happened before, and I remember when Macy's bought Famous Bar, the May Company, and they asked me to lead the rally with the CEO, and the CEO promised that all the jobs would stay, and it'd be great. Well, and I was the MC of this darn thing. Within a year, they had cut hundreds of jobs. So, and people were sending the angry emails my way. So I hope this is not the case this time.
Well,
ironic. Go ahead, Mel. Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say that the thing that troubles me is this company is for tax purposes domiciled in Ireland. I just don't have a lot of faith in a company that's in Ireland for tax purposes, being really good to us here in St. Louis, Missouri. It just scares me.
Ironically, Charlie, Macy's also announced another drastic level of cuts today at the executive level. So it's it is ironic that we're talking about your experience at that rally. I think that you're all making great points, but at the same time, as Alvin said, putting the cart before the horse, we have allowed these tax breaks, previously to companies in much brighter times. And right now we don't have a cart or a horse. And so a lot of people were calling the newsroom yesterday, very excited, wanting some more information about this company. And so we can correct the situation down the road. But for right now, I think whether it's 200 jobs or, 1,400 jobs or 1,500 jobs, I think right now it's good news and we need to latch on to it.
Wendy, that's a good point.
I have to say
I'll give you that.
I'm sorry.
No, I just said that was a good point. That was a good point by Wendy.
Well, it is fine, but I think one of the things that's being left out is, I don't know if you've seen the food lines in Town and Country. And the suffering people of Town and Country, I feel like, need a break too. I feel like we ought to put the same recording on. I guess you can't disarm in this, but I'm kind of with Alvin and Bill in that let's not sell it. And you, Charlie, I have a hard time celebrating this just because it's so wrong. And I know we can't unilaterally disarm, but when you see Town and Country and it's this, oh, it's a couple hundred jobs, trust us on the ones later. I'm just tired. I feel like we ought to have a pre-recording for this story because it's the same story every time.
Well, let's go to Bill McClellan on our second topic of the week. And the St. Louis Post-Dispatch reported in this morning's paper that census estimates tell us that about 21,000 African-American residents have moved out of the city of St. Louis since 2010, whereas at one point, the city of St. Louis, not too long ago, was 51% African-American. It's now about 45, 46% African-American, which has political ramifications to begin with. But also, Bill, it's not good when a city is losing any residents, but, a minority community that has great heritage, et cetera. Do you think this is, can you give us an explanation for this? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the only explanation that I could offer is that Black people move out of the city for the same reason that white people move out of the city. Better schools, safer, whatever their reasons are. I think that the reasons for people leaving the city are all across the board. I can't pinpoint anything.
Well, I got to believe that it's crime, schools.
Well, that's the same reason
services.
white people move out there.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that if you're going to scrutinize why anybody moves out of the city, okay, Black people should be held to the same standard as white. And I'm waiting for somebody to call it, Black flight as opposed to white flight. I will say this, and Charlie, you talk about St. Charles and O'Fallon and everybody's moving there and whatnot. And it's kind of like, well, maybe it's, better standard of life. And that's why they're leaving the county or leaving, some county that's west of where they live. And nobody questions that. And it's just that story just made me feel like, why are Black people leaving the city? And I said, like, it would be the same reason anybody else is leaving the city. Oh, and I got a text just like right before we went on that was basically saying that about that story. If you go to jail or go to prison, your home address is still the same. So for all the, smart alecks out there who are thinking, well, it's because Black people get sent to prison, your home address is still your home address, to my understanding. So this is people that aren't lawbreakers that just decided it's time to go. And
hopefully nobody's really thinking that would be an awful thing.
That'd be an awful thing. That's the first thing. There are people watching this show right now, Ray, and that's the first thought. All 21,000 of them went to prison.
Well, right. That's pretty sad if that's what it is.
Well, I agree. We live in sad times, Ray.
I agree. I'm saying I think it's sad if anybody would say that. I agree with my fellow founder and you basically. I do just because he's my fellow founder, but there's no way to distinguish. I think it would be interesting if there was a way to study. We make a lot of broad assumptions about both whites and Blacks. It would be interesting if we could really identify them and actually study why they do. We can assume what we want, but I think that's probably true. And I don't see any reason to think that Black people leave for any different reason. I think the interesting thing is I think the city's down to 293,000. And I think that should be concerning because I think the health of the city does matter to the entire region. And I do wish the city could re-enter the county, but as a
not good. I hadn't heard that. That's interesting news, Ray. I hadn't heard 293.
That's a number I think I saw recently, and I'd like to see us have the city be be part of the county like U City and Kirkwood and others are. But I don't disagree with everything you guys are saying.
Anecdotally, most every young couple that I know is moving into the city.
That's true.
And that is the truth. And so, but
that's
agree
a good
with
thing.
I think that is true.
My colleagues that we shouldn't question why Black families are moving out if we're not asking questions. I mean, we've never asked questions about why white families are moving out.
Well,
yeah, but I got to tell you guys, I mean, that it may seem that way, Wendy, but in fact, it's Wentzville that's picking up so many people that they have built a new school in the Wentzville School District every year since the year 2000. And that's really where the action is right now in our area.
But now, Charlie, you're forgetting what went on in like inner ring suburbs, and it's still going on right now. See, everybody's moving to Wentzville and whatnot. I mean, we had a bond issue that failed here because Kirkwood schools are overcrowded. So it's not like everybody's just like jumping 3 counties and getting the heck out. I mean,
but that's where the population growth is.
I'm not sure all the African Americans moving out of the city.
What does that
there?
Why is that significant? What does that say to you, Charlie? I mean, I think
no, you said that you said all the young people are moving into the city, but the numbers aren't really reflecting that because in the past 10 years, for example, while we lost 20,000 blacks, only 590 white people have moved into the city in 10 years. So either people are dying or they're moving somewhere else. But now, Wendy, I want to ask you about a story out of St. Louis County, which did build in this age of coronavirus, a morgue that could, under the worst of circumstances, accommodate all the bodies that wouldn't be able to go to the usual, I guess, morgues. So in this case, they spent about $1.8 million, but only $1,000 went to minority contractors. And in the county, you're supposed to set aside 25% of the contracts for minority firms. Although they did this with St. Charles County, I don't think they've got quite the same rules. But don't you think it's the fault of St. Louis County Council, which said, "Oh, Sam Page, you take care of all the contracts. We're not going to have any oversight."
I think there's plenty of blame to go around. And when I read this story, I think that is what all of the social unrest has been about lately. We're distracted by statues and the names of cities and that kind of thing, but I think it's about the minority business owners who have been promised a place at the table, and then the table keeps getting moved around the room. They're not invited, they're not told when dinner begins. It's just, these things have to be addressed with the utmost urgency now. And for Sam Page to say, well, our Office of Diversity, this kick the can down the road mentality has to stop now, because that's what this is about, in my humble opinion, is giving them the place at the table that was agreed upon.
I remember when Sam Page was trying to get to be county executive, and who was his opponent on the county council? Hazel Irby. And he neutralized Hazel Irby by giving her this big job that pays a lot of money, so she's going to have a terrific pension, and the job was being diversity officer. And then when the Wildhaber problem came along, we learned that, well, Hazel, our new diversity officer, was the only one on the county council who had opposed gays having the protected rights. And so we have Hazel as the diversity officer, and this first big challenge comes, the building of the morgue, and no money virtually goes to minority contractors. And in the story in the American, Hazel Irby is there just saying, well, they just went around me. You know what can I do? And I thought, Hazel Irby and Sam Page both deserve the blame on this one.
I agree. And what is I guess we know what Sam Page's job, but what is your job? Okay. And it would be to review any contract or any negotiations for contracts involving minority contractors. One thing that also need to be pointed out, any city, county, at least in the state of Missouri anyway, that has these numbers, they're all worded in a way that we will strive for. There hasn't been a single project, probably going back 30, 40 years, probably forever, that would said, like, if you are not at 25%, work will stop. In fact, work will not begin on this project until you get to 25. It never gets to that. So, I mean, it's often that, well, we did the best we could, but we couldn't get there. But
Yeah, but
Bill, you're
guys,
absolutely correct.
Charlie, can I get a word in on this? First of all, this is the definition of systemic racism. Okay, this is. I disagree a little bit in that. To me, the only person that needs to be held accountable is Sam Page because he is in charge. It's his office. It's his. And with regard to Hazel Irby, who I think I was like the one-day assistant campaign manager for, because I thought she was the best compromise candidate when Stanger left the building. Sam Page didn't accommodate her. He steamrolled her. And that was actually, you could argue.
She was thrilled to get the job, Ray.
She was not thrilled to be steamrolled first. I'm sure she was thrilled to get the job, which I don't even know.
It gives her a big pension.
Look, I just don't think Hazel Irby's the problem here. I think Sam Page owns that.
But no, wait a minute, Ray. Ray, I wanted to be, all right, let's say I wanted to be the manager, okay? And I got steamrolled and I didn't get to be the manager or whatever. But then I was put in charge of rookie development. And for 2 years, our rookie's been god awful, okay? And so they call me in and say, like, why the rookies stink? I don't know. They went around me. That's not an answer. That's not doing the job.
Let me jump in here a second.
In August, Hazel Irby isn't on any ballot. Sam Page is on the ballot.
It is true. The buck should stop at Sam Page's desk, but don't forget.
On the ballot.
Let's go back.
Irby isn't up.
Let's go back 60 days. People were thinking that the cadavers would be piling up and we'd have to stack them like cordwood. There wasn't time to go out for bid. It was an emergency. We were in the middle of a pandemic. So they were building, they had a deadline of yesterday to build this. So that's the reason they built it. They gave $1.8 million to the firms that were there. And on another occasion, when they can go out and have requests for proposals and invite bids and have thoughtful procedures, that's great. But this is not that situation.
But what
this is CARES. This is
minority
minority
inclusion. Go ahead, honey.
This is CARES Act money.
Right.
And these emergency contracts, these emergency on-call contracts were never adjusted. So we have to make sure that before the next wave, whenever that's going to be, whether it's day after tomorrow or 2 months from now, we have to make sure that these contracts are up to speed.
Well,
are updated.
That's one way of doing it. The other is to go to the best offer at the lowest bid, which I think serves everybody, Black, white, Asian, and Latino.
No, I think that minority inclusion is an issue. My problem is there shouldn't need to be an inclusion and diversity office. It should be what you do. Okay, you shouldn't need a person to do it. And the fact is, if you were committed,
get rid of Hazel Irby, then get rid of the office, right? If you don't need the office,
I don't disagree. I'm saying
now you shouldn't be. People in America shouldn't be doing a lot of things. I think they shouldn't be flying the Confederate flag, but they're going to do it until you tell them to stop doing it.
I'm just saying.
Ray, that's Pollyannish right there.
Let's move on. We'll stay with you, Ray, because there are movements afoot to rename Delmar Boulevard, George Floyd Boulevard. There are movements to change the name of the city of St. Louis and Columbia, Missouri, and remove the statue of St. Louis. Okay, just tell us, where should we go from here?
I am tired of this. People on my side, on the left, need to stop talking about statues and symbols and start talking about Medicaid expansion. They need to talk. This is an election year. Deb Lavender is in a great race with Andrew Koenig, who's one of the most extreme conservatives in the legislature. We should be talking, and she should be talking about Medicaid expansion and the effort to undo Clean Missouri. That's the stuff we ought to be talking at the national level about corruption in the DOJ and that. We don't need to be talking about statues and symbols, and I'm tired of it. That's my opinion.
I would be fine with the George Floyd divide if that is something, because they're not the Universal African Committee, and forgive me, it's the Green Party of St. Louis, and then with the St. Louis African Universal Committee, they are not saying that there's anything wrong with Delmar. They're just saying that because of its location, that it would be a great place for the George Floyd divide. I think the Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard, Dr. Martin Luther King Drive was the result of the civil rights movement in 1964 and onward. if it is agreed upon by everybody, I have no problem with George Floyd divide. I really don't. Now, when it comes to St. Louis, I just, for the last time, I just want to say I don't understand why we are judging historical figures on previously unenlightened times, during previously unenlightened times, by today's standard. If you can bring perfect people to us now, we're not perfect today. We're still not perfect. But each era progresses on the mistakes of the past. The pyramids are the great, one of the great mysteries or wonders of the world. They were built by Hebrew slaves. Do we take them down? I mean, I think Ray is right. We have to move past this, but don't touch St. Louis's statue and don't touch the name of the city of St. Louis.
I agree with Wendy on that.
The only part I don't agree with Wendy on is renaming Delmar George Floyd. I mean, George Floyd was murdered, and I'm glad that the police officer has been charged with murder. But you name things after people for what they live for. And George Floyd, to compare him in any way with, Martin Luther King Boulevard, Martin Luther King achieved a great deal. And George Floyd had kind of a sad life, and he had a criminal background, and he didn't die heroically, he died tragically. So I wouldn't be tearing down statues of Columbus or Andrew Jackson and be naming streets after George Floyd. I think that'd be a real mistake.
Most St. Louisans, if you ask them who St. Louis is, they'd say that's the guy on the horse outside the art museum. That's all the thought they give to it. So that's all the thought that should be given to changing the name of the city. It's a talking point. It's a, clickbait. But in all seriousness, all these things have to be judged, one item at a time. We're not going to change the name of the city. So we can just move on from that. And just everyone should be judged individually and then go from there. Oh, and by the way, this is still a city that has a veiled profit ball. I mean, come on. Until all that changes, let's just forget about statues.
If we want to talk about racial justice, on August 4th, Medicaid expansion is on the ballot. That's what racial justice folks that care about this should be talking about, because it's on the ballot in less than 2 months, August 4th. Okay. And that's a real thing. This symbolism, and it's just I said no.
Okay, Ray. Thank you. On to Bill McClellan for our next topic. Bill, twice the number of signatures required to put airport privatization on the November ballot were handed in since our last Donnybrook. And now there are actually two avenues to getting that done. One is the signature route, and the other is the route through the St. Louis Board of Aldermen. And that's led by the president of the board, Reid. It looks like that's also on a road to getting the job done. So now you got Ed Finkelstein announcing this week that all the major unions are behind it. We have, I believe, the NAACP behind it, many members of the Board of Aldermen, and plus 38,000 signatures, twice the number necessary. And it was announced that there are 11, count that, 11 lobbyists working on this proposal to privatize the airport. I think this idea has legs. What do you think?
Well, anything that has a lot of money behind it in today has legs. This is a dangerous thing. I mean, I looked at, the list of the lobbyists, Lou Hamilton and Michael, Daryl Piggy. It reminded me of the VP Fair of years ago when they would announce the bands, and I would go, I sort of remember them. I mean, this is like the greatest hits of the 80s coming forward. And Sam Gladney, who I know a little bit, who's in charge of this, who won't tell us who's financing this, except saying that it's not Rex Sinfield. And I think whenever they don't want you to know who's financing it, there's a reason they don't want you to know. So I think this is a terrible idea. And I think that it does have legs because it has all this money.
I think Bill is right. I think Tony Messenger did a great column about the secrecy around Travis Brown, who works for Rex Singfield. And if you don't think Rex Singfield's part of this, you really do need to buy the Poplar Street Bridge or something. As far
That's
as
the William L. Clay Bridge.
I look at this. I'm sorry. Excuse me. I didn't mean that. There's two phases to this. There's the first phase, which is what we're talking about, the lobbyists and the folks doing the campaign. And to me, they're almost like defense lawyers. They're gonna, with bad clients. I don't even care about that, because the big money, I think in 40 years of doing this, the potential for abuse in this project, which has almost no merit, is literally higher than anything I've seen in 40 years. I think this is a terrible, horrible thing. The first phase is going to be to get it on the ballot.
Hey, Ray,
I really think it's problem.
You said it has no merit. There's 1.8 billion reasons why they're going for it.
It is not. This project has, if this project had substantive merit, we'd be having a debate about it. This was rolled out by our last mayor very disingenuously, and it is
on his way out the door. On his way out the door, remember?
Right. 26 days at the end of a 16,000-day term.
It's $2 billion. We got people leaving the city.
It's a disaster, Charlie. And I would say this, for all Black people out protesting, for all the different reasons and great reasons they are, I need you to turn around and look at two of our own, Adolphus Pruitt and Lewis Reid, and truly ask them, brothers, what are you about? Because this is about them. This is not about us or the city of St. Louis. And it's disgusting. And I'm with Ray on that. This is the big scam.
Why?
Because it's got a B in front of it, Charlie. And when we forget about the money they're going to spend on consultants, that's one thing. I'm talking about the money afterwards. And the idea that when you put a B in front of something, it's a number we can't even comprehend. The potential for bad stuff happening in this, and it doesn't have. There's not one of these that's worked in the country. Okay, they're really and
there
the fact,
aren't any.
If you want the canary,
I happen to agree with you. I'm playing the devil's advocate, but that is a lot of money. Okay,
Charlie,
Ray, we're out of time, Ray. Thank you, everybody. Tell you what, we have to take a quick, short break here, but we're going to come back with Derrick Goold from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch as baseball is going to resume. Go Cardinals. That's next. Don't go away.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network. Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Hey, thanks for joining us for the second half. This is part 2. And today on the hot seat, we put Derrick Goold, the beat writer for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Of course, he covers all things Cardinal. And after some rancorous negotiations, it looks like we are going to have a baseball season, a shortened one. Derrick Goold, we're so glad you were able to join us for this edition of Donnybrook. How are you?
I'm good. I'm flattered. I get like my Donnybrook debut, so I'm a rookie after 20 years in St. Louis. I'm a rookie again. It's nice.
Well, you might be a rookie on this program, but you're one of the most knowledgeable people on baseball that we all know, and that's why we're so glad you could join us. Maybe you could just share with our viewers the broad outlines of the agreement between the players and the owners, the league, and what this year's baseball season is going to look like.
Yeah, it's basically a two-pronged agreement, one of which was imposed on the players, and then the other one which the players worked to have an agreement on. The first side of it, which was imposed on the players, is the schedule. It'll be a 60-game schedule. It'll be based geographically, so that means 40 games against the National League Central, where the Cardinals will be competing for a playoff berth, and then the remainder of the 20 games will be against teams in the American League Central. That's obviously a departure from the 2020 schedule imagined, which would have had the Yankees coming to town soon and would have had the Cardinals visiting Fenway Park. So it's a switcheroo of the schedule so that everything's geographically confined, trying to limit travel, trying to maximize the number of days they can play in. So it's 60 games in 66 days. And again, that was imposed by the commissioner because they couldn't come to an agreement beyond what was agreed upon in March, which guaranteed players a prorated salary based on games played. This was a huge issue. Every time the owners made a proposal, it was some variation of a common theme. It would extend the number of games, but it would take a further cut of their salary. And so players would counter with like, no, we want to play 114 games, but full prorated salary. And owners would come back and say, well, we'll play 81 games, but we're going to have this tiered system where the cuts are deeper to the higher salaries, or you're going to play at 80% of your prorated salary. Eventually, they made the proposal for 60. The union countered with 70, and the owners imposed the 60. The other part of this is the health and safety protocols. And these were negotiated and they were come to an agreement because otherwise the players likely wouldn't be returning to work until they felt comfortable that their health was in play. It includes widespread testing. It includes 3 tiers of that testing, with tier 1 being the players and the most aggressive and the most expansive testing, and tier 3 being people who won't be in direct contact with the players. So like you're talking about some support staff, or folks like me, beat writers and media, who will be in that tier 3. There are other protocols in place. It goes, to the ones that you've probably seen: no spitting, no hugging, no ripping of jerseys for celebrations, social distancing in the dugout, so much so that some players will be in the stands, masks worn by non-playing players or non-playing officials in the dugout, lots of distance, and even like things like not licking fingers when making a pitch. So all these things are in place. That's where they're at. They've already had some positive tests in baseball. You're probably going to hear, the math says you're going to hear more of them, because now the players are going to start reporting. Cardinals this weekend, a lot of players around the league this weekend are going to be reporting for their entry exams, their entry tests. And so, as we all know, the more tests they have, the more, people with coronavirus who are asymptomatic they're going to find, and baseball expects that. That's why there's a 48-hour quarantine in place, and you're going to see them really strive to identify early, isolate, to allow for the season to continue.
Derrick, is in colleges, National Football League, as guys have started to come together to work out, there has been like an uptick in people that have, contracted the virus. Baseball has to be prepared for that as well. So, what is the contingency plan? And I understand they're going to have like a taxi squad of players that could come and go and along those lines. But are you feeling that Major League Baseball is confident that A, they won't have to shut down at some point, but B, just an individual team will just basically have to, just say like, we're playing, but we're playing with guys that should be in AA baseball. But this is all part of it?
Yeah, these are all fair questions. And I think it's interesting that you use the word as baseball confident. I don't think so. I think baseball is going to be pragmatic and proactive. I'm not sure of any institution or any outlet that could be confident that they have this solved. What they can decide is to have protocols in place to at least minimize the exposure. They can do contact testing or contact tracing, to keep track of where people have been. And again, it's going to be a big thing where, players wanted the responsibility of policing themselves. Baseball is doing something far different than the other leagues are discussing. Baseball is going to try to play in its home ballparks. Baseball is going to have teams traveling around. It's way different than the bubble plan that the NBA has or the hub plan that the NHL has. And in that way, baseball thinks that it can maybe, with discipline and with quick action, proactive action, lead a pathway back for other institutions to come back, or at least offer some ideals that other groups can latch on to, whether it's other sports leagues or even when you think about like a school where players and classes, players would be a class moving in and then going home, but you could keep track of where they're going and they're committed things. So I don't think confident is a word. I think they have a lot of questions, but they're counting on those questions to be their guide so that they can be really disciplined and strict when it comes to this. What you're talking about there, Alvin, with the extra players is another part of this. Is there's going to be a 60-man organizational roster that has to be set this weekend. Of that 60-man, 40 will be the usual 40-man that we always talk about in baseball. which is the players who are eligible to come to the major leagues. And then of those 40, the Cardinals and every other team will start with a 30-man active roster. The idea is to protect the pitching, to give teams that added benefit, that added insurance. And you're right, there'll be a taxi squad group that'll basically be 30 players to start, and then eventually be about 34 plus players in Springfield. And they'll be readily available because baseball is instituting a COVID-19 injured list. Players will be placed on it if they test positive or they have a positive test or symptoms in their family, so that they can create that added buffer of isolation and quarantine. And then a player will have a number of tests that he has to pass before he can then return to the team.
Derrick, a few years ago, when I was kind of morose about the Cubs' chances, you consoled me and told me that the Cubs are going to be good in a couple of years. And by gosh, in a couple of years, they were good. They were great. And now I'm concerned again because I think that in a 60-game schedule, pitching is going to be so important. And I'm afraid that the Cubs might not have enough pitching. Could you console me and all the other Cub fans in the audience? Tell us not to worry.
All three of them?
Yeah.
I cannot. I'm sorry. If that is your measure by which to not worry about the season, then I'm not going to be much good for you. I will maybe give you some sort of a security blanket that was explained to me by a player today, that it might not matter what kind of pitching a team has if it has two great hot hitters going 60 games just back to back, Maris and Mantle style, and I guess Rizzo and
Right.
have that talent.
I feel better already, Derrick. Thank you.
So if you think that the lineup can get hot all at the same time, then the Cubs are treacherous. The Cubs are a fascinating team because they are in a fragile moment in their franchise history. I mean, this was the core that was supposed to take the crown back and hold it for a long time. They have one title to show for it. They seeded the division of the Cardinals last year. The Cardinals were back on top, and they have a bevy of financial questions. Let's be honest. It could be a very interesting time to be a Cubs fan because a week, 2 weeks into this, all of a sudden you're wondering if they're going to be trading Bryant to get out from the financial haul there. It's a very fragile time for that organization and fascinating time.
Well, it's a fragile time for me then, Derrick.
Okay, enough of this Cubs talk. Ray?
Oh, well, Derrick, would you favor a plan that in which Major League Baseball came back but didn't have the two Chicago franchises because of troubles
No,
there?
because I like the White Sox. No,
I thought that would be fair. That would take one Chicago team out of each league and consolidate things. I thought that'd be good. You mentioned franchises. You may know I'm somebody that saw Stan Musial. I have a childhood memory of seeing Musial hit a home run over the right field pavilion at Sportsman's Park. And I'm one of the people who kind of resents the idea that the DeWitt ownership group, which was based in Cincinnati, came in 1995, and after 100 years of loyalty, we treat the DeWitt owners, who have been fine stewards, as like they invented the Cardinals. When Bill DeWitt says that this is such a tough business, and Forbes magazine has his business that he paid $55 million, his group, worth $2.2 billion today, and by the way, says that it will survive the pandemic. What do you say to that? People like me that just don't think DeWitt and the Cardinals are the same thing.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. I've asked a lot about it when you say that the DeWitt and the Cardinals aren't the same thing. I get that. I actually think of the Cardinals as a public trust, which is probably what you're talking about. Is they're an ambassador to the world for St. Louis. You go and travel abroad or travel within the country, and you ask, or somebody says where you're from. You say you're from St. Louis. They're going to bring up baseball, beer, and the Arch in a lot of ways, depending on where you are, and not always in that order. You can look at a snapshot of a crowd when people would get together in crowds in Europe and find a Cardinals hat. So I think of the Cardinals in that way. And so I guess I understand what you're saying is that the identity is not solely the DeWitts. The DeWitts do not possess the brand or history of the Cardinals. That's something you can't buy. And in the same way, you can't buy the loyalty. However, they are, to use your word, a steward of it. In that comment where he was talking about how baseball, I believe, the phrase he used when I spoke with him, this is last fall, and I was asking him about Ballpark Village, and when the revenue, the profits, the jackpot from Ballpark Village would spill over into the ballpark and the product on the field. And the phrase I used is, fans can sit in the stands and see that ATM rising in center field. When do they get to see where the cash is spent on some of the players? And his point then was that, baseball is not a wildly profitable business. That was the phrase he used. Now, what he means by that is it's a business phrase in the sense of, and he's speaking somewhat of a different language than what we think of when we talk to, or like in our line of work or layman of work. He's talking about a lot of cash on hand. And as far as baseball goes, they make a lot of money. They do. They have tremendous revenue. Before this shutdown, they're an $11 billion industry. They have a $1.2 billion rights deal with Fox Sports Midwest. A lot of that grinds to a halt, though, when everything is based on games, ticket sales based on games, rights fees based on games. All that stuff just vanishes. However, even when the games are going good, you're talking about taking in the revenue and then reinvesting it in some way, whether that's debt service, mortgages, or the staff that's doubled in size and coaches' salaries that have doubled in size or in value. Things that we don't really talk about because we focus on the payroll of the team and don't realize how much more, how much, I guess, more expensive coaches have become, or analytics departments, or tech, or things like that. And so he misspoke in that way because he should have, been able to explain, like, this is where the money's going. I will not go on my 45-minute rant about the Forbes valuations, but I will say that these are private businesses, and those valuations are estimates based on publicly available numbers. They are usually low, but they are also talking about when a team is willing to sell. And until that point, then it's not worth what it says. I understand what you're saying as far as, like, what could you get a loan on, or what would you be valued as far as to get a better rate, or to work out a refinance the mortgage, or whatever they want to do there. I understand exactly what you're saying, but those Forbes rates, they tend to be low, but they also tend to say what they only come to pass when a team is sold. And it's then that, yes, they are wildly profitable. Baseball teams, when sold, are wildly profitable. But baseball teams, when possessed and trying to run, it goes back to the business phrase, is the revenue coming in, profits are then flipped and invested to continue increasing the overall value of the franchise.
Wendy?
Derrick, I keep thinking about James Earl Jones and that amazing monologue in Field of Dreams when he talks about baseball, Ray, and what it means to this country through wars and tragedy and all of that. And so I'm deeply touched by the fact that they're trying this hard and that they have come to some point of agreement. I'm not naive enough to believe that it's not all about the money, but still, I am optimistic. And as weird and almost science fiction like as the whole setup sounds, I think people are just going to be so happy to see their teams take the field. You talk to everybody from the front office to the fan base. Was this necessarily damaging to either side? I know that Fred, there's been a lot of, ink spilled over the bad guy, the good guy, the victim, the oppressor. Do the fans really care at this point, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, there's entertainment dollars at stake here, right? Right. Everybody in their business has had a varying degree of pinch because of this, furloughs, layoffs, pay cuts. I mean, I don't think any of us here talking haven't had some exposure to some kind of reduction in our entertainment dollar spending because of this coronavirus, and the pandemic and the shutdown that followed. And we probably expect more pinches ahead. So as fans think about how they're going to spend their entertainment dollar or invest their time, they've had months here without baseball to find other things. They've had months here without blockbuster movies. They could find other things. So I do think that there is an element there where baseball coming back, is going to, bring back the fans who are devoted. But it's not going to be without its bruises for people who have to make a decision on where they want to put their spending, especially if that spending is reduced. Especially when the squabbling was presented somewhat, and I'm going to say something here that I'll look at all your expressions as I say it. That was oversimplified by saying it was billionaires versus millionaires. Yes, it was billionaires. Owners are billionaires. But not all players are millionaires. Some of these players are going to have careers where they won't make $1 million. And so they were arguing to try to make what they could while they were putting a lot at risk by going on the field. There are some players who have already been fronted enough of their salary this year that they effectively will be playing for free for 60 games. That's remarkable considering the amount of discipline and testing and things that they're going to go through in the next 66 days and 87 days if you include the summer camp, with effectively no paycheck. So I think we need to keep that in mind. But I don't think that the average fan might not dig deep enough and might just see people squabbling over dollars that they no longer have and no longer want to spend on this form of entertainment. I do think baseball has some goodwill it has to re-earn, but maybe talking more about what the players are doing to try to bring the game back will be part of that.
Derrick, explain that for my benefit once again. How is it that some players will be playing for no money?
So as part of the March deal, the players had their salaries fronted to a certain extent, meaning the owners paid it on contingent that if there was a season to come back, that debt would then be applied to what is owed the players. So say you're a player who makes minimum salary, you were already fronted, a majority of your salary for this season, and that then will come off the prorated salary that you're going to make over the 60 games because it's less than half a season. It's 37% of a season. So effectively, everybody was making 37% of their paycheck.
What's minimum now, Derrick?
Let's see.
About 3 or?
No, 560.
Okay.
About 560, 575.
Okay. All right. Wendy, first of all.
It's not small money. I'm not trying to argue that.
Oh, no. I had not kept up enough to know what the minimum salary was. First of all, Wendy, I can't stand that movie. I never liked it. I just don't know why people got all into Field of Dreams.
I agree.
All right. Bad News Bears is the best baseball movie ever made. But that aside, okay, Derrick, we go to extra innings, and there's a runner will start on second base. Yeah. And one of the plans had the National League, adopting the designated hitter for at least this season. Okay. That the guy on second base seems kind of gimmicky. And quite frankly, I thought, well, maybe you should just have ties this year. And then if you would answer to that, and then more importantly, please, God in heaven, tell Mr. DeWitt and the National League owners to not adopt the designated hitter, because that will be the end, for me. I just can't see that. Please don't do it. So I'll let you attack those two.
All right. Well, I'm gonna continue my universal disappointment tour here. I think it's time that you probably embrace the DH. You mentioned Ben Frederickson earlier. He and I did a podcast for the Post-Dispatch not too long ago, and basically asked the question: Did we watch the last National League baseball game in March of this year before the shutdown? And I think that's entirely possible. The NL style of baseball that we know many of us adore and like and have grown up on, or heard tales of, it probably won't be around. Does that mean that the DH is a given? The DH is a given this year. There will be a DH in the National League. At some point in time, the Cubs will play the Cardinals at Wrigley Field, all things going well, and there will be a DH in that game. It'll be jarring to see. But the deal that was impressed upon the players does not include the guarantee of a DH for 2021. So you could see the resumption of pitchers hitting next year. However, that's on the table for discussions, and it's a pretty big chip considering the collective bargaining agreement expires at the end of next season. So that is something that both owners and players see as a significant chip to play. And National League owners have in my conversations with them or people who are close to them, warm to the idea of a universal DH. Regardless, you're going to see some changes to the schedule too. It sure seems like this is an entry point for more teams playing more of each other from the other league. So you're going to see some of this maybe geographic, scheduling over, carry over. So the Twins who used to come up here every so often, or Cleveland that used to come in here every so often, or the White Sox, which you talked about earlier, who used to come in here every so often, you might see more regularly from here on out. At least that's in the discussions. So, I think it's far more likely that they do away with some of the carnival aspects of extra innings. They don't like that they go back to more of a traditional extra inning game. But it's more likely that the DH might be here to stay, or at least be more prevalent in seasons to come.
Derrick, you write about the thing that St. Louisans are most passionate about, the Cardinals, and they have such high expectations, and social media is so incivil. What kind of relationship do you have with the fans? I mean, what kind of relationship do you have with the fans?
That's a great question. I guess it probably depends on the win-loss record of the team, or what I recently tweeted, or what I'm checking. I mean, the tone of emails in my inbox can be different than the tones on Twitter. Twitter tends to be a little bit more knee-jerk and bullwhip and colorful with its language, because it can be fired off so quickly. Emails, are to take a different tone. Though
I know if the Cardinals lose 4 or 5 games in a row, or 3 games in a row, there are people just ready to throw everybody out.
Yes, yeah, including me, because it's my fault that they didn't throw a curve.
Right.
I
didn't hold them accountable.
That's the favorite phrase, is you didn't hold them accountable. I heard that, for 7 years with Mike Matheny as the manager. I heard a lot about how I didn't hold them accountable.
Derrick,
and then when you hold him accountable, they go nuts.
That is also true. Then when I hold them accountable, I'm disrespectful.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well,
I never buttoned up a jersey and all these. Yeah, but you know what though? I have found that to Bill's question, it's the old letter to the editor argument that we, or example that we were given at J School. This notion that it's far more motivating when you're angry to write a letter to the editor than it is when you're satisfied. And so that's very much. I mean, you gotta keep in mind that the loudest folks tend to be the angriest folks, just by the nature of if they're satisfied or if they're content, then why take the energy to write?
Yeah, Derrick, I first of all hate to do this to you, but I gotta say, you and Ben Fred really do a great job. I mean, and I usually like to beat up for the Post for a living, or used to, but having said that, actually, I'm not making this. McClellan literally stole my question. So let me ask you one.
It was mind control.
I don't know how, he just stole my
2
question.
minutes to go.
So let me ask you a different one. How do you think the Cardinals will do in what we're calling the season, 60-game thing, whatever it is? How do you think they're going to do?
I think they're positioned to do pretty well. Back to Bill's question about pitching, they have very deep pitching. They have the deepest pitching in the division, and the schedule is going to be favorable for them because the American League Central features multiple teams that are either coming out of a slumber or still pressing the snooze button in a slumber. So they're not drawing, say, the American League West or the American League East in this schedule. They're drawing the Minnesota Twins and then an upstart team in the Sox. So I think it sets up very well for them. They have 5 starting pitchers who will be healthy. Miles Michaelis will be back. They have a good depth of backup pitchers in there. When you think of Gung-Young Kim, who the pitcher who they signed from Korea, Daniel Ponce de Leon, Genesis Cabrera, these guys who can all handle multiple innings and give them a case where the starter could go 4, the next guy could go 2 with a different look. So you go from Wainwright's curveball to Genesis Cabrera's 98 from the left side, then to a bullpen that might have Helsley, Gallegos, and Hicks. It sets up very well for them to shorten games in a shortened season and be very aggressive with almost like an October style of baseball.
Don't
Sorry,
sleep
Derrick.
Derrick,
We're
don't
out of
sleep
time,
on the
guys.
White Sox. Don't sleep on the White Sox. My
I
Chicago boys, this is it. We're coming.
For 2021. Okay.
All right.
By the way, 20 seconds to go, Derrick. No fans in the stands. Is that accurate?
It is to start. It is. That does not mean it's permanent.
Gotcha.
Expand the stands to Ballpark Village rooftop. Maybe they'll be there.
Okay, Derrick Goold, beat writer for the St. Louis Cardinals for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Thank you very much for joining us on Donnybrook. We hope to have you back soon.
It was my pleasure, guys. Thank you very much for the invitation. I enjoyed this.
Thank you, Derrick.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week at this time. Thank you. Go Cardinals.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.